Hero society has a name for everything, a ranking for every power, a license for every fist, a word for every child born with a spark in their blood, and a word for the ones born without. Quirkless. They taught that word to a little green-haired boy on a rooftop. They taught it kindly. They taught it cruelly. They taught it the way you teach a stone that it will never be a bird. But what if the word came back? What if it came back wearing a red coat, riding a machine the size of a moon, with an intelligence quotient of 300 and absolutely no interest in your ranking system? Dr. Ivo Robotnik has conquered oceans. He has cracked the sky. He has built empires out of scrap and spite, and he has lost every single one of them to a blue blur traveling faster than sound. But the blue blur is not here. There is no hedgehog in this world. There are only heroes. And heroes have never fought a man they cannot erase, cannot steal from, cannot understand. A man with no power at all, except every power he ever built with his own two hands. Plus Ultra. Let's see how far Ultra goes. This is What If Eggman, and his empire entered My Hero Academia. Written by me. And listen closely, because the doctor is always listening. Somewhere in the comments below is the next world he opens a door into. Name it. Name the universe. Name the character you want dragged through. He reads everything, and he takes requests. Now, look up.
The first person in this world to see the Eggman Empire was a woman named Sachiko Ito, and for 11 seconds she believed it was a smudge on her monitor. She worked the graveyard shift at an orbital tracking annex outside Tsukuba, a squat concrete building with bad heating and a vending machine that only sold barley tea. Her job was to watch numbers, debris fields, decaying satellites, the occasional spent rocket body tumbling home. It was the kind of work you took if you wanted to be left alone, and Sachiko Ito had wanted very much to be left alone since 1997. At 03:47 in the morning, an object appeared in geosynchronous orbit above the Kanto region, not approached, not entered from a trajectory. Appeared. One sweep, it was empty sky. The next sweep, the return came back so large the software rejected it as an error, flushed the buffer, and asked politely for a new reading. It got the same one. It rejected that too. Sachiko leaned forward and typed the mass estimate in manually, because the machine would not accept it. The machine was right to refuse. The number was wrong. The number was obscene. Nothing that heavy could be up there without the tides noticing, without the moon flinching, without every seismograph in the country writing a confession. She ran it 3 times. She got 3 identical impossibilities. Then she pulled the optical feed because she needed to see it. And that was the moment Sachiko Ito's life divided cleanly into before and after. It was a sphere, gray and red, plated in seams like something assembled rather than grown, big enough that the curve of it filled her screen and kept going past the edges. Running lights blinked along its equator in a slow, patient rhythm. There were docking bays, gun batteries, an entire cracked continent of machinery. And on the front of it, stamped across the hull in metal the size of a mountain range, was a face, a round face, a bald dome, 2 dark circular lenses, and beneath them, spanning half a hemisphere, an enormous swooping mustache. Sachiko Ito stared at the moon that had a mustache. Somewhere under her ribs, a very small, very reasonable part of her brain sat down on the floor and refused to get up. She reached for the phone. She missed it twice. The object did not move. It did not signal. It simply hung there over Japan, the way a man hangs a painting he is very proud of. 64 minutes later, every hero agency in the country would have the image. 90 minutes later, so would the world. By dawn, 4 billion people would have looked at a photograph of a face in the sky and felt, in the base of their skull, the specific ancient dread of being seen by something enormous. But right then, at 03:47, it was just one tired woman in a cold room, and a mustache the size of a mountain range. Inside, it was going considerably worse. The doctor came up out of unconsciousness the way a submarine surfaces, all at once, violently, shedding water, except the water was coolant, and it was on fire, which coolant was not supposed to be, and that fact alone told him the day had gone catastrophically sideways before he had even opened his eyes. Dr. Ivo Robotnik lay on his back in the wreckage of his own laboratory and performed a full diagnostic on himself in 4 seconds flat, because a mind that runs at 300 does not have the luxury of panic. Ribs, bruised, not broken. Skull, intact. Glasses, on his face, cracked in the left lens, unacceptable. Coat singed. Dignity, unquantifiable. He sat up. The Death Egg's primary lab was a ruin. The dimensional focusing array, 6 months of work, 40 billion in materials, the single most elegant thing he had ever constructed, had folded itself into modern art. The containment ring was sheared through. Cabling hung from the ceiling like the entrails of something that had died badly. Emergency lighting turned the whole cathedral of it a deep and unpleasant red. He remembered the moment before. He remembered it with the crystalline hatred he reserved for anything that had ever gone wrong. The Chaos Nullifier. 7 emeralds seated in the ring. The theory was flawless. Not a weapon that killed the hedgehog, because killing the hedgehog had been attempted 141 times by his own count, and the hedgehog kept declining. No, a device that reached into the substrate of causality and simply removed the variable, unmade him. A world where the blue nuisance had never existed, and every Eggman empire that had ever crumbled would stand. And it had worked. For about 1/5 of a second, it had worked perfectly, and then chaos energy had done what chaos energy always does, which is exactly what it feels like doing. The rift had not deleted Sonic. It had grabbed the nearest large object, that object being the Death Egg, which was, admittedly, extremely large, and thrown it sideways through the wall of everything. Dr. Eggman got to his feet, brushed ash off his cuffs, and started walking toward the bridge, because self-pity was a hedgehog's hobby. 2 spheres came bobbing out of the smoke to meet him. "Doctor!" Orbot's gray faceplate lit with what passed. On Orbot, for relief. "You're alive. The emeralds are gone." "Yes, I can feel the absence of them the way you can feel a missing tooth." He did not slow down. "Scattered. They always scatter. That is what they do. It is practically their personality." "Qbot. Present and correct, boss," said the yellow one, floating upside down. "You are neither of those things. Structural. Hulls at 88%. Reactors purring. Weapons systems nominal. Fabrication bays are," Qbot rotated, considered, brightened. "Fabrication bays are fine." Eggman stopped walking. That was the moment the day turned. Because the reactor was intact. And if the reactor was intact, then the fabricators were live. And if the fabricators were live, then every Badnik schematic, every egg pawn template, every design he had drawn in 40 years of obsession was still sitting in memory, waiting, and the Death Egg could produce them at a rate of 11,000 units per day for as long as there was iron in reach. He had lost 7 gemstones. He had kept an industrial civilization. Eggman resumed walking, and he was smiling now, and it was not a nice smile. The bridge was a wide, dark bowl of consoles overlooking a viewport 40 meters across, and through it hung a blue-white world, wrapped in cloud, going about its business. He stood there for a long moment with his hands behind his back. "Full spectral sweep," he said. "Everything. Radio, microwave, optical, seismic, network traffic. I want to know what I'm standing on." Data began to fall, and Dr. Ivo Robotnik read a planet the way other men read a menu. It was Earth. Near enough. Same continents, give or take a coastline. Same gravity. Same species. One dominant, bipedal, breeding well, wiring the whole globe with fiber optic and shouting into it constantly. That was familiar. That was comfortable. Then the anomalies started coming in, and his eyebrows crawled up over the rim of his glasses. Because the news feeds were showing him a man who put out a building fire by inhaling it, a woman who cut a truck in half by pointing at it, a teenager on a training field growing 8 extra arms and being graded on it by a certified instructor in a school. Eggman leaned closer to the screen. Orbot. What percentage? Cross-referencing, public health records, census data, a pause. Approximately 80% of the population possesses a heritable superhuman trait. Local terminology, Quirk. 80%, Eggman repeated. He said it flatly. Then he laughed, a single bark of it, sharp and delighted, echoing off the bridge. 80%, 8 in 10. A planet of walking violations of thermodynamics, and they had institutionalized it. They had rankings. He was looking at rankings. There was a top 10. There was merchandise. There were licensing exams and celebrity endorsements, and a public safety commission, and somewhere in the middle of all of it, a colossal blonde man in primary colors, punching a monster through a skyscraper, while a crowd cheered. They had turned a phenomenon into a career. "Oh, that's marvelous," Eggman breathed. "That's genuinely marvelous. They've domesticated it. Look at them, Orbot. Look at what they did with a miracle. They put it in a uniform. Doctor, I would advise, keep reading." And Orbot kept reading, and the thing that made Eggman's smile falter came 4 minutes later, buried in a sociology paper he had scraped out of a university server, because he was thorough, and it was 3 in the morning down there, and nobody was watching. The other 20% had a word too. Quirkless. He scrolled. He read the studies. He read the employment statistics, and the school data, and a paper on bullying incidence rates, and a suicide figure that was higher than it should have been, by a factor he could not attribute to anything but pure, ordinary human cruelty. He read a case study about a boy, name redacted, green in the accompanying photograph, small, who had been told by a doctor at 4 years old, kindly, with a diagram, that he would never be a hero. Eggman was quiet for a while. He was, and this was the part that nobody in this world would understand for a long time yet, absolutely quirkless himself. He always had been. He was a fat, bald man with a bad heart and an enormous mustache, who had never once in his life been able to do a single thing that was not first assembled out of parts. He had also, by his own count, conquered 99% of a planet and held it for 6 months. Dr. Eggman began, very slowly, to laugh again, and this time it kept going, and it filled the bridge, and Cubot bobbed anxiously at the edge of it and did not join in. "They pity them," he wheezed. "Orbot, they pity them. They have 8 billion people with fire in their hands, and they look at the ones who have to build it, and they say, 'Oh, poor thing. Oh, what a shame. What a shame.'" He wiped the cracked lens of his glasses with a gloved thumb. "I have never in my life," said Dr. Ivo Robotnik, "been handed a better world." There was one more sweep. He ran it himself. He did not tell Orbot to. He sat down at the console, and he pulled up a search protocol he had written 11 years ago and refined every year since. A protocol tuned to a very specific signature, a mass-to-velocity profile, a sonic boom acoustic fingerprint, a spectral band in the blue. He ran it against the entire planetary data set, every camera, every satellite, every phone, every hour of footage this world had generated in a century. The search finished in 91 seconds, 0 results. Eggman stared at the screen. He ran it again with the tolerances widened to absurdity. Any small, fast animal, any anomalous supersonic event, any echidna, any fox, any of them, anything, any thread of red or blue or yellow in the whole staggering noise of a civilization. 0 results. The bridge was very quiet. Somewhere in the guts of the station, a coolant line was still burning. He had spent his entire adult life inside a shape. The shape was, build the thing, launch the thing, and then, on schedule, at the exact moment of triumph, hear a sound like a wasp and lose everything. 141 times. He had built his personality around a fixed point, and the fixed point had a heartbeat and green eyes, and it always, always came. And it was not here. It had never been here. There was no version of it here to become here. He was standing over a world of 8 billion domesticated miracles, holding a fully operational death egg and a fabrication capacity of 11,000 units a day. And there was nothing in the sky, nothing on the ground, and nothing in the future coming to stop him. Orbot would say later, much later, to Cubot, quietly, in a maintenance bay, that the doctor did not celebrate. That was the part that unsettled him. There was no cackle, no dance, no monologue. The doctor simply sat in front of a blank search result for 4 minutes and 30 seconds, entirely still, his hands folded in front of his mustache. And then he stood up and adjusted his coat and said, in an ordinary conversational voice, "Wake the fabricators. Motobug pattern, buzz bomber pattern, egg pawn pattern, 4,000 units, standard alloy, no frills. Doctor, we don't yet know what these heroes are capable of. We have no combat data. We have..." "That," said Eggman, "is what the 4,000 are for." They came down at 09:12 in the morning over a coastal city called Choshi, which had 11,000 residents, one aging hero agency, and a very good fish market. They did not come down like an invasion. That was the thing the analysts would fight about for years afterward. There was no bombardment, no ultimatum, no demand. A single drop pod split off from the underside of the sphere in the sky, burned through the atmosphere trailing a white scar, and cracked open 40 meters above the harbor. 4,000 machines came out of it. The sound was the first thing, not screaming, humming. 4,000 small engines spooling up at once, a note somewhere between a chainsaw and a beehive, and it rolled across the water and hit the town and rattled every pane of glass in it. Then the buzz bombers came out of the cloud in a lattice, wings a translucent blur, needle cannons folding down. The motobugs hit the concrete of the seawall and started rolling. Red, single-wheeled, one great stupid cyclopean eye each, spreading out along the promenade in a spacing pattern that was not random, that was considered, that covered every avenue of approach in the town in under 90 seconds. The egg pawns landed in ranks, straightened up, and shouldered their lances with the tidy, synchronized clack of a parade, and then they simply began to advance, and they did not fire first. That mattered. That was on purpose. Every gun waited. The town's local hero was a 58-year-old man called Wavebreak, whose quirk let him raise a wall of seawater 8 meters high, and he had held that seawall against 3 typhoons and 2 villains in 31 years of service, and he did what he had always done. He planted his feet on the promenade, and he pulled the harbor up out of its bed and threw it. The wave hit the Badnik line at 40 kilometers an hour, and swept 1,100 machines flat. Wavebreak had 1 second to feel it. That old clean surge, I've still got it. Before the remaining 2,900 adjusted. They didn't panic, they didn't scatter. The surviving buzz bombers rose 8 meters, exactly clearing the maximum height of the water wall, held station, and waited. The motobugs at the rear reversed out of the flood zone in a smooth arc and began circling wide, out along the streets, around the town, behind him, and in orbit, in a dark bridge in front of a 40-meter viewport. A very fat man, with his hands folded under his chin, watched telemetry scroll and murmured, 8.2 meters, hydrostatic, volume limited by proximity to a standing body of water, recovery interval, 11 seconds. He tapped a gloved finger on the console. "Thank you, sir. That was extremely useful." Then the guns opened up, all of them, at once. Endeavour arrived 19 minutes later, and he came in fast and low over the water, with his shoulders trailing blue fire, because the #1 hero of Japan had been the #1 hero of Japan for 8 months now, and he had spent every one of those months being told, in the polite silence of a nation, that he was not what they had lost. He hit the promenade like a bomb. What he found was a town that had not been destroyed. That was the first wrongness. The buildings were standing. The fish market was standing. Wavebreak was alive, unconscious, propped against a bollard, with 2 egg pawns standing over him, not touching him. Standing over him, watching. 4,000 machines occupied Choshi and had killed no one at all. Endeavour turned in a slow circle, flame guttering off his forearms, and every optical sensor in that town turned with him. 2,000 red eyes, all at once, tracking, recording. The heat came off him in a wall that cracked the pavement. He was the strongest man in this country, and he could feel, in his teeth, that he was being measured. "Who is in command here?" he roared at the sky. And the sky, 400 kilometers up, and wearing an enormous mustache, said nothing at all. It just kept watching. The Hero Public Safety Commission convened at 14 o'clock in a bunker under Tokyo that officially did not exist, and by 1420, It had discovered that it did not have a word for what was happening. This was not a small problem. It was, in fact, the entire problem. And it took a very long time for anyone in that room to understand that. The commission ran on categories. That was what it was for. A category was a lever, and a lever moved money and heroes and warrants. Villain was a category. It meant unlicensed quirk use, with intent to harm, and it unlocked lethal force authorization and mobilization of ranked heroes within 4 minutes. Nomu was a category. Foreign incident was a category. Natural disaster was a category, and it was not the same category as any of the others, because you did not send hawks to punch a typhoon. The thing above Japan fit none of them. He has committed no quirk offense, said the woman at the head of the table, and it came out sounding like a complaint. There is no quirk. There's no registered quirk factor in any of it. Analysis went over the wreckage from Choshi for 6 hours. It's metal. It's tooled metal, and photovoltaic cells and a lithium cell that isn't even particularly good. My daughter's drone has better batteries. Then it's an armed incursion by a foreign power, someone said. That's the self-defense force. That's not us. Which foreign power? Silence. Name it, she said. Name the nation, and I will hand this file to the Ministry of Defense in 90 seconds and go home and sleep. Name it. Nobody named it. Because the sphere in the sky had come from nowhere. No launch, no trajectory, no origin. And the astronomers had all agreed on that within 6 hours, and then gone very quiet about what it implied. There was no nation. There was no flag except the one stamped on the hull, and the one stamped on the hull was a face. It occurred to the woman at the head of the table, in a moment of clarity she would remember for the rest of her life, that they had spent 80 years building the most sophisticated apparatus in human history for managing superhuman power, and it had exactly one assumption baked into every layer of it, so deep nobody had ever thought to write it down. The dangerous thing is a person with a power. They had no procedure for a person with a factory. He gave them 31 hours. It was long enough for the fear to set properly, like concrete, and short enough that no one had time to get organized. He had done this before. He had a feel for it. At 20 o'clock on the second night, every screen in Japan went to black. Not just the broadcast networks, not just the phones. Every device with an antenna and a display, every train departure board, every billboard in Shibuya, every hospital monitor, every jumbotron over every stadium, all of it, at once. And the thing that terrified the engineers afterward was not that he had done it. It was that he had done it cleanly. He had not broken into their infrastructure. He had walked through it. There was no forced entry. There were no shattered locks. He had simply understood their networks better than the people who built them, in 31 hours, from orbit, and let himself in like a man coming home. Then the black resolved into a face, 40 feet high, over Shibuya Crossing, and 126 million people looked up at a mustache. He was sitting in a chair. That was what everyone remembered. Not a throne, a chair, red leather, with his gloved hands folded across his stomach, and his boots up on something out of frame. He looked comfortable. He looked like a man about to tell a long story to children. "Good evening," said Dr. Ivo Robotnik. His voice was warm. It filled every street in the country, and it was warm, and that was so much worse than shouting. "My name is Dr. Ivo Robotnik. I hold 7 doctorates, none of which are from your world, so you may safely assume I did not steal them. I am the man in the sky. That is my station. Yes, it is as heavy as it looks, and no, it is not going to fall on you, though I confess the question has come up in my correspondence." He let that sit for exactly 1 beat. "I want to begin by apologizing for Choshi. In the bunker under Tokyo, 12 people leaned forward at once. That was a test. I make no attempt to pretend otherwise, because I find lying to be a poor investment. I needed to know what your heroes could do, and there is precisely one way to learn what a thing can do, which is to make it do it." Wavebreak performed admirably. He is alive. He is, I am told, eating solid food. I have sent flowers. I mention this because I want you to understand something about me before we go any further, and it is this. He unfolded his hands. I do not kill people I have not been introduced to. Somewhere in Musutafu, in a small apartment, an old blonde man in a pinstripe suit sat forward on a sofa with a handkerchief pressed to his mouth and felt his blood go cold, because he had heard a lot of villains talk. He had heard them threaten and rave and posture for 30 years. He had never heard one apologize, and he understood instantly, with the animal part of him that had kept him alive through 6,000 fights, that he was watching something new. Now, said Eggman, to business. I have been reading about you. I have read a great deal in 31 hours. I read quickly. It is one of my many advantages, and I have some observations. May I? He did not wait. You have superpowers. Congratulations. 8 in every 10 of you were born able to breathe fire, or turn your skin to diamond, or make a chair very slightly heavier, and you have organized your entire civilization around this fact with a thoroughness I find genuinely, professionally impressive. You have a ranking board. Do you understand how funny that is? You took the greatest phenomenon in the history of your species and you gave it a leaderboard. Number 1. Number 2. There is a man at number 3, and I am given to understand he is upset about it. The laugh he did then was small and fond. And you have heroes. Licensed, salaried, merchandised heroes, who arrive in 19 minutes with their names on their chests, and who protect you. Well, that is charming. That is a charming arrangement, and I want to be very clear that I am not here to take it away from you. He leaned forward, and the 40-foot face over Shibuya filled the screen, and the 2 dark lenses looked down at everyone at once. I am here to talk to the other 20%. The silence in that country was the loudest thing that had ever happened to it. Yes, Eggman said softly. You heard me. I'm not talking to the fire breathers. I'm talking to the ones standing next to them. I know you're there. I counted you. 1,600 million of you on this planet. Near enough. And I have read every study your universities have written about what happens to you. I know that you are twice as likely to leave school early. I know your employment rate. I know what happens to a quirkless child in a schoolyard in this country, because you published it. You published it in a peer-reviewed journal in 2014, and then you did nothing at all about it for 12 years. He tapped one finger against his temple. I know a doctor sat a 4-year-old boy down with an X-ray and a diagram and told him, kindly, I want to stress that word. I've read the transcript. The man thought he was being kind, told him that he had 2 joints in his little toe, and therefore he would never be a hero. And I know that boy went home and cried and asked his mother if he could still be a hero anyway. And I know what she said. In a small apartment in Musutafu, Inko Midoriya put her hand over her mouth. She said, I'm sorry. Eggman let it hang. I want to tell that boy something, he said, wherever he is. I want to tell all 1,600 million of him something, and then I'll leave you all in peace for a while, because I am aware I've run long, and there's a drama serial some of you were watching. I am quirkless. The word went through the country like a fault line opening. I was born with nothing, not a spark, not a flicker. I cannot lift a car, I cannot breathe fire, I cannot run. I get winded on stairs, and my cholesterol is a war crime. I have never in my life done a single thing my body could do. And I have conquered 99% of a planet. He said it without heat. He said it the way you'd read a number off a receipt, and it was the flatness of it that made it land like a hammer. I built the machine you are watching me on. I built the station in your sky. I built the 4,000 soldiers your number 1 hero could not arrest because there was nothing to arrest. I did it with my hands and my head. And here is the thing. Here is the part I would like you to sit with tonight. All 8 billion of you, the 80% and the 20. Your heroes were given their power. At birth, by an accident of blood. They didn't earn a gram of it. They were handed the greatest gift in your world at 4 years old by a lottery. And then you built a leaderboard, so they could compete over who got the best prize. I made mine. So you tell me, Japan. You tell me which of us is the miracle. He sat back. I'm going to be here a while, Dr. Eggman said pleasantly. Do think it over. And to my 20%, You know how to reach me. I'm the large object in the sky. I'm not difficult to find." The broadcast ended. For 11 seconds, 126 million people stood in the street and did not move. Then, somewhere in the crowd at Shibuya Crossing, one person began to clap. It was not many. It was, the analyst determined later, fewer than 40 people in a crowd of 2,000. But it was not zero. And that, more than the station, more than the 4,000 machines, more than any of it, was the number that the woman in the bunker, under Tokyo, wrote on a piece of paper at 2014 that night and stared at until her eyes hurt. Not zero. They sent Eraserhead in on the 5th day, and they sent him because he was the answer. He had always been the answer. That was his entire function in the ecosystem. For 2 decades, whenever Hero Society met a power it could not outpunch, someone in a room made a phone call, and a tired man with a scarf turned up and looked at the problem, and the problem stopped. The target was a fabrication site in the Chichibu Mountains, and the fact that there was a fabrication site in the Chichibu Mountains was itself a catastrophe nobody had processed yet. He had come down. Not the man, the machines. A seed pod the size of a house had dropped into a quarry on day 3, unfolded, and started eating the mountain. By day 5 it was producing 200 egg pawns a day out of Japanese granite and Japanese iron and the Japanese power grid, which it had politely tapped into, and which, this detail made the commission physically ill, it was paying for. There was an account. The account was in credit. Somebody had filed the paperwork. He was building an army out of their own country and settling the invoice on time. Aizawa came in through the tree line at dusk with a strike team of 4 behind him, and he was not worried, because he had read the intelligence, and the intelligence was good, and it all said the same thing. No quirk factor detected. He didn't believe it. Of course he didn't. He had heard no quirk factor before, and it had always meant we haven't found it yet. Everything was a quirk. That was the water this world swam in. 80% of people had one, and the 20% who didn't were ordinary, and nothing ordinary built a moon. So there was a quirk. Some emitter type, some enormous unregistered mutation, telekinetic assembly, matter shaping, machine control, a mind quirk, something. And when he found it, he would look at it, and it would stop, and then it would be a fat man in a coat on a mountainside, with 4 heroes standing over him, and this whole obscene fever dream would end. That was the plan. That was, when you stripped it down, the entire national strategy of Japan on day 5. Find the quirk and erase it. The egg pawns saw them at 400 meters. Aizawa knew that, because the machines all turned their heads at once, in unison, with a soft servo whine that carried through the trees, and he felt every hair on his arms stand up. 200 red faceplates, no shouting, no alarm, just a small, polite chime, from all of them, at the same time. Then, a floating red sphere came drifting up over the quarry lip, and said, in a pleasant butler's voice, "Ah, Eraserhead, Class 1A homeroom teacher, UA High School, Quirk, erasure. The doctor said you'd come on the 5th day. He was quite specific. He's watching, if it helps." Aizawa's goggles snapped down. His hair rose. His eyes lit red. The capillaries flooding. That old familiar burn starting at the back of his skull. He looked at the machines. He looked hard, with 20 years of practice behind it, reaching out for the thing that was always there, the shimmer, the tether, the invisible cord between a person and the impossible thing they were doing, the thread he had been born to cut. There was nothing to cut. He stared at 200 egg pawns standing in a quarry in the Chichibu Mountains, and his quirk reached out into the dark and closed on absolutely nothing at all, and the machines did not so much as flicker. He blinked, had to. The burn was starting, and he did it again, harder, and again there was nothing, because there was nothing to be nothing. There was no cord, there was no shimmer, there was no person on the other end of these things doing them. They were not being powered by anyone. They were just there, the way a rock is there, the way a chair is there, the way a hammer sitting on a bench is there. Inert, ordinary, meaningless matter arranged by somebody clever into a shape that walked. He was trying to erase a machine. You cannot erase a machine. You cannot erase a car. You cannot cancel a toaster. Aizawa stood in the tree line with his hair floating and his eyes burning and his quirk running at full power into a void, and for the first time in 20 years, Shota Aizawa understood that he was standing in front of a problem that had no relationship to him whatsoever. The egg pawns raised their lances, and 400 kilometers overhead, in a dark room, a very fat man watched the telemetry come in and folded his hands under his mustache and said, softly, almost tenderly, the way a man speaks to a beloved and broken thing, "Oh, my dear boy, you've spent your whole life turning off the lights, and I don't use lights, I use wires." The quarry fight lasted 6 minutes and 40 seconds, and Shota Aizawa won it. Nobody expected that, least of all him. He came off the tree line at a dead sprint with his eyes dead and ordinary in his head, because erasure had nothing to grab and he had stopped wasting blinks on it inside the first 2 seconds. And that was the difference between Aizawa and every other hero in the country. He did not spend 20 seconds refusing to believe the evidence. He believed it instantly. The lever did not work. Fine, use another lever. He hit the first egg pawn at 40 kilometers an hour with a steel cord capture weapon and took its head off at the neck seam. That was the thing about the scarf. Everybody thought the scarf was part of the quirk. It wasn't. The scarf was carbon nanofiber, wound around a metal alloy weave, and it had been designed by a support engineer, and it did not care in the slightest whether the thing on the other end of it had a quirk factor or a serial number. It was a rope. Ropes work on machines. He went through them like a man doing housework. The strike team behind him, 4 heroes, all emitter types, all very good, lasted 90 seconds before 2 were down and the other 2 were pinned behind a rock spur trying to make fire do something useful to an object that had no nerves to feel it with. That was the trap. That was the trap the whole country was going to fall into for the next 3 weeks. Their entire arsenal was tuned for bodies, pain compliance, fear, shock. Every hero in Japan had spent their career fighting things with a pulse, and a pulse is a lever too, and Eggman's soldiers had no pulse to pull. But Aizawa had spent 20 years fighting people whose powers he had already switched off, which meant Shota Aizawa had spent 20 years fighting ordinary things with his hands. And it turned out, and this was the joke of it, the joke that 400 kilometers up a fat man was laughing at with genuine unfeigned joy. That of every hero in Japan, the one who was best equipped to fight a machine army, was the man whose entire power was making things ordinary. He didn't need to make them ordinary, they already were. He broke 31 egg pawns in 6 minutes and 40 seconds with a scarf, a crowbar he took off one of them, and a working knowledge of where a hinge goes. He dragged both unconscious teammates out. He put the pinned pair over the quarry lip with a boost off his shoulder. He was the last one out, and he was bleeding from the scalp, and his left arm did not work properly, and he had lost. He knew he had lost. That was the other thing about Aizawa. He was not a man who confused a tactical result with a strategic one. He had killed 31 units out of 200, and the fabricator in the quarry produced 200 a day, which meant that in 3 hours and 45 minutes, the mountain would have replaced everything he had just done, with his body and his blood, and the worst night of his professional life. He had broken a wave with a bucket. He sat in the tree line while the med team worked on his arm, and he watched the quarry lights burn steady in the dark, and the soft, rhythmic clank of assembly drifted up through the pines like a lullaby, and Shota Aizawa understood the shape of the war for the first time, and it made him feel very old. In orbit, Eggman watched the replay 4 times. "Again," he said. Orbot cued it again. The tired man came out of the trees. The scarf went out. The head came off. Again, the tired man, the scarf, the head. "Doctor, is something wrong with the—" "Look at him." Eggman was leaning so close to the display that his mustache brushed the glass. "Look at what he did. He tried the quirk. It failed. And how long?" "Orbot, time it for me. How long between the failure and the crowbar?" 2.1 seconds, sir." 2.1 seconds. Eggman sat back and pressed his gloved fingertips together and made a sound that was almost reverent. 2 seconds to abandon the only thing he's ever been. Do you know how rare that is? I have fought a great many people, Orbot. Do you know what they all do when the thing they're famous for stops working? They do it again. Harder. Louder. They stand there doing the same failed miracle over and over, with their eyes shut, because it is the only proof they have that they are somebody. This man dropped it like a hot pan and picked up a bar of metal. He tapped the screen, where the frozen figure hung mid-swing, hair floating, eyes dark and perfectly ordinary. That's not a hero. That's an engineer. He just doesn't know it yet. Sir, he did dismantle 31 units. He did, and I have replaced them, and made 40 more while we were talking. And he knows it, which is why he sat down in the dirt instead of celebrating. Eggman's smile faded into something more thoughtful. Flag him. Priority. Not for termination, for conversation. I want to know what a man like that costs. And if he isn't for sale? Everyone's for sale, Orbot. The only ever question is the currency. He waved a glove. Some want money, some want power, some want the world to be a certain way so badly that you can lead them anywhere at all just by promising them the shape of it. He looked back at the frozen image of a tired man swinging a crowbar. That one wants his students to live. That's a currency. That's a very expensive currency, but it's a currency. The application started on day 6. That was the word the commission used, and they used it because they could not bring themselves to use a truer one. Applications. It began with a website. It appeared at 06 with no host, no registrar, no server anyone could find. And it was still up 11 weeks later, after 4 national cybersecurity task forces had thrown everything they had at it. It was, by the standards of the modern internet, almost insultingly plain. White background, black text, a small stylized mustache in the corner. Eggman Empire, recruitment, no Quirk required, no Quirk preferred. And then, underneath, a list. Positions, fabrication technician, logistics coordinator, structural engineer, metallurgist, network operations, chemical process. Nobody with a Quirk factor above 0.2 need apply. And salaries. Actual salaries, in yen, and the salaries were good, and there were benefits, and there was a housing allowance, and there was a line at the bottom that read, all applicants receive a written response within 48 hours. Signed personally, Dr. I. Robotnik. 11,000 people applied in the first day. The commission's initial position was that this was a stunt. Their second position, 4 days later, was that it was a psychological operation. Their third position, arrived at slowly, painfully, over 3 weeks, in a room with the lights off, was that it was neither, and that was so much worse. Because he hired them. He hired a 44-year-old metallurgist from Kobe, who had been passed over for 11 promotions in favor of men whose quirks let them feel stress fractures by touch, and who had watched every one of them make mistakes he could have caught with a calculator. He hired a 19-year-old girl from Nagoya who had failed the UA entrance exam 3 times, because you cannot pass a combat exam by being the best mechanical designer of your generation. He hired a 61-year-old chemical engineer with a pension that did not cover his wife's care, and a note in his file from 1989 that said, in the polite language of a different era, quirkless, not management material. He wrote to every one of them personally. That was the detail that broke people. It came out later, in the leaks, and every letter was different, and every letter was specific, and every letter had read the applicant's actual work. Your 2019 paper on grain boundary embrittlement was correct, and your reviewers were idiots. I have need of a man who is right when it is inconvenient. R. You failed their exam because their exam does not measure anything real. Attached is a problem their exam could not have set. If you can solve it in a week, I will pay you 4 times what they would have. If you can solve it in a day, I will do something better than pay you. R. They put a word in your file 37 years ago, and you have been carrying it ever since. Put it down. I am not interested in what you cannot do. I am interested in what you have built despite them, and I have read all of it. Start Monday. R. He never once said, poor thing. That was the whole trick. And by the time anybody in the commission understood it, 16,000 of the best quirkless technical minds in Japan had a badge with a mustache on it, and there was nothing illegal about a single one of it, because, and the commission's own lawyers confirmed this, twice, miserably, offering someone a job is not a crime. He's not raising an army, the woman in the bunker said, at 02 o'clock. To nobody. He's raising a workforce. Ma'am, the machines. The machines are the advertisement. She had her head in her hands. He put a moon in our sky so that 16,000 people who've been told their whole lives they're nothing would look up and see what nothing can build. And now they're his. Not because he threatened them, because he read their papers. She looked up. When did we last read their papers? Nobody answered. There is a village in the Chubu Highlands with a population of 411, and in the third week its bridge, the only bridge, 60 years old, condemned since March, unfunded, was rebuilt in 9 hours by 200 egg pawns who arrived at dawn, worked without stopping, and left. They did not ask permission. They did not ask for anything. They did not speak. The village voted, unanimously, and by the fourth week, there was a flag hanging from the new bridge with a mustache on it. And when the commission sent 2 heroes up to have a quiet word about it, 411 farmers stood in the road and would not move. That was the week the word started appearing, not in the news. The news would not touch it for another month. In graffiti, on walls, in Musutafu and Kamino and Choshi and everywhere else, he built it. What did you ever give us? Tomura Shigaraki came to the mountain on the 29th day, and he came because he could not stand it. He walked into the quarry alone, in the rain, hands in his pockets, and 200 egg pawns turned their heads and did not fire, because they had been told not to. He walked up the ramp of a landing barge that had opened for him, and through a corridor, and into a wide, dark bridge 400 kilometers up, and the whole way his nails were digging into his own throat. Eggman was waiting in the red chair with a cup of tea. Tomura Shigaraki, he said. Sit. I don't sit. No, you don't, do you? You hover and scratch. Eggman gestured with the cup. Say your piece. I've read your file. Such as it is. Your file is mostly other people's guesses. So do skip the introduction. Shigaraki stared at him, through the strands of pale hair. This was not going how it went. It always went the same way. He walked in and people felt it. The pressure of him, the wrongness. And then he made them into dust, and the room understood. The fat man was drinking tea. You want to destroy it, Shigaraki said. Hero society. All of it. That's what the broadcast was. Was it? You're taking it apart. His voice cracked, hoarse and young. You're doing it in front of them. You put a face in the sky and now they're scared. They're scared all the time. They're looking up. Nobody's looked up since All Might. That's mine. That's what He stopped. Started again. I want in. You want in. Eggman repeated. I have people. I have Gigantomachia. I have Dabby, Toga. I have the whole. The scratching got worse. I know this world. I know where it's soft. You've got machines and no understanding. You need someone who knows where to cut. Eggman set the cup down. Boy, he said gently, why do you want to destroy it? Shigaraki blinked. What? It's a simple question. I ask it of everyone. Why? What did it do? Eggman folded his hands. And before you answer, I know some of it already. I know a 5-year-old dissolved his family in a suburb on a nice afternoon and stood in the street, covered in what was left of them, and screamed for 4 hours. I know how many people walked past. I have the traffic footage. 211 adults, Tomura. 11 of them slowed down. He said it flatly, without pity, without softening a single syllable, which was the only reason Shigaraki was still standing there. I know a great deal about being the thing everyone walks past. So why? Shigaraki's mouth worked. Because it's fake, he said. All of it. They stand there smiling with their hands out and there's nothing behind it. And everyone knows, and everyone pretends. Yes, said Eggman. It is. And I want it gone. Gone. Eggman leaned forward, and his voice did not rise, and it was worse than shouting. Gone. And then what? The rain hammered on a hull 400 kilometers above the rain. Then what, Tomura? You take the whole thing apart. You get everything you want. Every hero dead, every tower down, every smiling face in the dust. And the sun comes up, and there are 90 million people standing in a field with no food, and no power, and no water, and no grid, and they look at you, because you're the one who's still standing. And what do you build them? Shigaraki said nothing. Nothing, Eggman said. That's the answer. You've never had one. You have spent your entire life sharpening a knife, and you have never once, not for a single hour, thought about what goes in the hole afterward. Because you don't want the hole filled. You want the hole. The hole is the point. He sat back. That's the difference between us, boy, and it's the whole of it. You're not a conqueror. You're a wound. You want the world to hurt the way you hurt, and when it does, you'll have nothing left to want, and you'll come apart, and there won't even be a scar where you were. And what are you? Shigaraki spat. Eggman smiled, and it was enormous and awful, and, in its way, completely honest. I'm an engineer, he said. I don't want it gone. I want it mine. I want the grid running and the trains on time and the lights on, and every single one of those 90 million people fed and housed and working and safe, with my face on the wall, forever. That is the difference between destruction and empire, and it is the reason you have lost 11 times and I have lost 141, because losing 141 times means I keep building it again. He picked up his tea. No, you may not join me. You'd break it. You break everything. It's your only talent, and it's not even a good one. I could build a machine to do decay in a fortnight, and it wouldn't scratch itself raw doing it. But you may go, and I'll tell you why. Why? Shigaraki whispered. Because you're going to keep doing what you do, said Dr. Eggman. And every hero in this country will keep looking at you, because you look like what they were built to fight. And while they're looking at you, he raised the cup slightly, in something that was very nearly a toast. Nobody is watching the factories. Hawks came up on the 40th day, and he came the way he always came, which was smiling. He flew up. That was the thing nobody had thought to check. The number 2 hero of Japan went to the edge of the atmosphere on his own wings, alone, unannounced, without telling the commission, because he had learned a long time ago that the commission was excellent at giving orders, and very poor at surviving their consequences. At 40,000 meters, his feathers began to freeze. At 60, he lost consciousness for 6 seconds. At 70, a docking bay opened underneath him like a mouth, and warm air poured out, and he fell into it, and lay on the deck plating coughing blood into a glove while the pressure came up. 2 floating spheres looked down at him. He's early, said the red one. Boss said the 9th week, said the yellow one, delighted. Boss never misses. Boss is gonna be so mad. The doctor said the 9th week for the commission, Orbot said. He said the bird would come on his own, whenever he'd finished being bored. Hawks got up onto one elbow and grinned with red teeth and said, "Take me to your leader." They took him to the leader. The bridge was dark and warm and smelled faintly of ozone and, absurdly, of coffee. Eggman was standing at the viewport with his hands behind his back, watching a continent go by. "Keigo Takami," he said, without turning. Hero name Hawks, number 2. Recruited at 15 by a government agency that took you out of a violent home and, I notice, never once returned you to a normal one. Your file is public for about 11% of its length. The other 89 is fascinating. You've been in the commission's servers, Hawks said. He said it lightly. He wandered a few steps, hands in his jacket pockets, looking at the ceiling like a man at an open house. I've been in everyone's servers. I'm in your phone. I've been in your phone for 6 weeks. You have 311 unread messages and a photograph of a chicken restaurant menu from 2022. Eggman turned around. You're here to defect. Am I? You're going to say you are. You'll do it well. You'll be charming and a little sad, and you'll tell me a true thing about your childhood, because you know a true thing is the cheapest way to buy a man's trust, and you'll offer me the commission's hero deployment schedule as a down payment. It'll be real. It'll be entirely real. Because you're not an amateur, and you'll have cleared it with them, and they'll let you burn something valuable to put you next to me." Hawk stopped wandering. "And then," Eggman went on comfortably, "you'll be inside my empire for 8 to 11 months. You'll be useful, you'll be charming, and somewhere around month 9, when I finally show you the room with the reactor in it, you'll cut my head off with a feather at 1400 meters per second and be back in Japan for dinner." The silence stretched. "That's the play, yes," Hawk said. "It's a good play. It's the only play you have. And you know that, because you've watched your entire country try everything else for 40 days. Eggman gestured at a chair. "Sit down, Bertie. You've had a long climb." Hawks did not sit down. "You're not worried. I'm delighted. Do you understand how difficult it is to find a genuinely competent enemy? I've had one my entire adult life, and I lost him, and I have spent 6 weeks down there watching men set fire to my robots." Eggman lowered himself into the red chair. "And then you arrive. A man who understood in 4 days that the war was already lost, and started planning for the occupation. Nobody in that bunker has admitted it yet, and you knew it in 4 days." Hawks's smile did not move. Something behind it did. "So here is my counteroffer," said Dr. Eggman. "I'm going to let you do it." "Do what?" "All of it. Come in. Spy. Take the schedules. I'll give you the schedules. They're not secret. The egg pawns walk in straight lines. It's the entire point of them. Send it all home. Every night. I won't read your messages, which will drive you insane, because you'll never know if that's true." He steepled his gloves. "I'll show you the fabricators. I'll show you the metallurgy. In month 9, if you still want it, I will personally walk you into the reactor room and turn my back on you. And you won't do it. You're very confident for a man with a neck. I'm confident because I know what you're for." And now Eggman leaned forward, and the warmth went out of his voice. And what was underneath was the coldest thing on that station. "They made you at 15, Kago. They took a boy who was fast and clever and hungry, and they made him a tool. And the reason you're the number 2 hero and not the number 1 is that you have spent your whole life being aimed at things by people who never once asked what you thought about the target. And in 9 months you'll have seen my empire from the inside. You'll have seen 16,000 people who were told they were nothing, building. You'll have seen a bridge in a village they'd condemned. You'll have seen the numbers, my actual numbers, hunger and power and infant mortality, and you'll compare them to the ones in the bunker. You will do this involuntarily. You won't be able to stop yourself, because that is what you are. You are a man who notices. It's the only thing they never managed to train out of you. And then someone in a room in Tokyo will tell you to kill me. And for the first time in your life, Bertie," Eggman sat back, "you'll have to decide whether they're right." Hawk stood there for a long moment. Then he sat down in the chair and let out a breath and rubbed his eyes with the heel of his hand and said quietly, "God, you're exhausting." "Yes," said Eggman happily. "Tea?" The letter to UA arrived on the 44th day, and it was addressed to a second-year student in the support course, and it broke something in that school that the USJ and Camino and the Paranormal Liberation War had all failed to break. Mei Hatsume read it standing up in the development studio at 0640 in the morning, with a soldering iron still smoking in her other hand. "Miss Hatsume, I have read your patent filings, all 11. Your reviewers rejected the hydraulic amplification joint on the grounds that it was unsuited to hero applications. I have built it. It works. It has been in service on my station for 19 days, and it is currently holding 4 tons of coolant line over my head. They didn't reject it because it was unsuited. They rejected it because you designed it for a body that isn't strong, and in that school the body is always strong. Everything they let you build has to be a costume for somebody's miracle. I don't have a miracle. Nobody in my empire does. Everything I own, I had to make out of leverage and metal and arithmetic, which is the only kind of engineering that is actually engineering. You are the finest mechanical designer under 30 in this country, and you are currently spending your talent making better boots for a boy who can already run through a wall. I have a fabrication floor 1,100 meters long. There are no combat exams. There is no ranking board. There is nothing to fail. Come and build something that has to work. Arme Hatsume sat down on the floor of the development studio, and she did not move for 20 minutes, and Powerloader found her there and did not ask, because he had read his own copy that morning and had been sitting in his office with the door shut ever since. She wrote back. That was the part that nobody predicted. 11,000 people had applied, 16,000 had been hired. Not one of them had argued. The reply went out on an unsecured channel from a student terminal at 02 o'clock, and it was 4,000 words long, and it opened. Your joint's going to fail. Not now. At about 1,900 hours of load cycling, which puts you 3 weeks out. You've got the Bohr ratio right, but you built it out of whatever you're eating that mountain for. And I'd bet my whole workshop it's a low nickel steel, because that's what's in Chichibu granite. And my design assumed a chromium moly alloy, because I'm not an idiot. And it's going to embrittle at the collar and drop 4 tons of coolant on your enormous head. I've attached the corrected spec. Use it or don't, and I'm not coming. You think you're offering me a workshop with no exams. You're offering me a workshop with no people. I don't build for the boy who runs through walls. I build for Izuku Midoriya, who breaks his arms every single time because his own power is too big for his body, and who came to my studio at 5 a.m. after the war, with his hands shaking so badly he couldn't hold the coffee, and asked me, the crazy one, the one everyone walks past, whether I could make him something that would let him save people without wrecking himself. Nobody has ever asked you for anything, have they? You said it yourself in the broadcast. You built all of it, every bit. You never let anybody hand you a single thing, not once, in your whole life. And now you're 400 kilometers up in a room by yourself, with 2 robots you made to talk to you, and you're writing letters to a 19-year-old at 2 in the morning. That's not because you don't need people, Doctor. That's because you're quirkless at the only thing that ever mattered, and you can't build your way out of it, and it's killing you. Yinsa Hatsume, fix the collar. 400 kilometers up, at 02:14 in the morning, Dr. Ivo Robotnik read that message 3 times. Then he stood up and walked out of the bridge, and Orbot found him 9 hours later in the fabrication hall, alone, in his shirt sleeves, with his coat over a railing, cutting the collar out of a hydraulic joint by hand, with a plasma torch he had not bothered to program a machine to hold. He did not mention the letter. He did not answer it. He kept it. All Might came up on the 50th day. He came up in a cargo transport with the seats taken out, because he could not fly anymore, and he brought nothing at all. No team, no weapon, no camera. He was wearing the pinstripe suit. He had a handkerchief in his pocket, and there was already blood on it before they cleared the troposphere. The docking bay opened for him too. Toshinori Yagi walked out onto that deck plating alone, 190 centimeters of skin over bone, and every egg pawn in that hangar, 300 of them, standing in perfect ranks, turned their heads at once. And then they went down on one knee, all of them, 300 machines, in unison, with a sound like a rock slide. All Might stopped dead. "They're not saluting you," said a voice from the far end of the hangar. "They're on a hydraulic hold. I didn't want you to have to walk past a wall of guns and pretend it didn't matter. You've had enough of that this decade." Eggman came out of the shadow between 2 gantries, and he was not in the Egg Mobile. He was walking. The 2 of them stood there, 10 meters apart, on a deck plate 400 kilometers above the country they were fighting over. "You know why I'm here," All Might said. "I know you're here because they wouldn't stop you and everyone else they would have. I know you've had 4 hemorrhages this year, and you're not supposed to be above 5,000 meters. Eggman's hands were behind his back. I know you came alone because you thought, if I saw the man and not the symbol, something would happen. You're wrong, but it was a good instinct, and it's the reason I opened the door. Then let me try anyway. By all means." All Might took a breath. It rattled. "Stop," he said. Eggman waited. "That's it," All Might said. "That's the whole speech. I'm not going to tell you that you'll be defeated, because you've read our files. You know exactly what we have, and you're standing here because you already did that arithmetic. I'm not going to tell you it's wrong, because you'll argue, and you'll be better at arguing than I am, and I'm too tired." He coughed, and blood came, and he did not hide it. "You're going to win. I've known that since day 5, so I'm just going to ask you, man to man, stop." Eggman was quiet for a long moment. "You know," he said, "you're the only person in this world who said that. 50 days. Not one of them asked. They shouted, they threatened, they sent that poor tired man with the scarf up a mountain. You asked." He shook his head slowly. "It's very nearly enough to make me want to." "Then, do you know what you are?" Eggman said. All Might said nothing. "You're the best thing this world ever built, and you weren't built. That's the obscenity of you." He took a step forward. "You got given a power and you spent it. Spent it, every gram, until there was nothing but this. Until you were a skeleton coughing on a floor, and you gave it away to a quirkless boy because you were the only man in 8 billion who ever looked at one and saw something other than a tragedy. You are, and I want to be extremely precise about this, the single greatest human being I have ever encountered, and you cannot save them, not anymore. You will stand in front of my empire coughing blood with your hands out, and you will not be able to do anything, because they gave you a miracle, and it ran out, and a miracle that runs out isn't a foundation. It's a loan." He stopped, close enough that All Might could see his own reflection in the cracked lens. "That is what I am here to prove. Not that you're weak, that you were always temporary, every one of you. 8 billion people living on the interest of an accident, and when the accident stops, and it always stops, Toshinori, it stopped for you, there's nothing underneath. There is only ever what somebody made." He stepped back. "Go home. Take the transport. It's fueled. I'm not going to kill the only decent man in your world in a hangar with nobody watching. That's not a victory, that's littering." All Might stood there, swaying slightly, one hand pressed to his side, and then he smiled. That old, enormous, ridiculous smile, cracked and bloody and absolutely unbroken. "You're wrong," he said. "Am I? You keep saying we were given it." He wiped his mouth. "One for all was given to me. That's true. But I trained 11 years before I could lift a car with it. My master died in front of me. I lost a stomach and a lung, and I got up 8,000 times, and every single time it was a choice. And nobody handed me that. Nobody hands anybody that. You're not fighting our power, Doctor. You never were. You're fighting the part of us that gets up. And that isn't a quirk either." He turned and walked back toward the transport, and 300 machines knelt in silence the whole way. Eggman watched him go, for a long, long time. Then he said, quietly, to nobody, "Orbot, sir, wake it up." There was a pause on the line. "Doctor, that one? That one. Sir, with respect, it was built to kill something that isn't here. I know what it was built for." Eggman turned and picked his coat off the railing and shrugged it on, and the warmth was entirely gone from his voice now. "Wake it up anyway." Deep in the black spine of the death egg, in a cradle that had been sealed for 51 days, 2 red optical sensors came on in the dark. It had been asleep for 51 days, and before that it had been asleep for 4 months, and before that it had been in a canyon on another world with its hands around a blue throat. Metal Sonic came online in the dark and ran its wake sequence in 11 milliseconds. Identity, confirmed. Chassis integrity, 100%. Directive, locate target, engage target, supersede target. Initiating search. It searched the station. It searched the orbital band. It reached down through the Death Egg's antenna array into an entire planet's worth of cameras and phones and satellites and history, and it looked for the shape it had been made to look for. A mass profile, a spectral band in the blue, an acoustic fingerprint like a wasp going past your ear at the speed of sound. Results. Metal Sonic did not have feelings. This was a matter of settled engineering fact, confirmed by its designer on 94 separate occasions, usually while shouting. It ran the search again. 0 results. It ran the search 4,000 times in 6 seconds. It ran it against every frame of footage the species had ever produced. It ran it against fossil records. It ran it against a children's cartoon from 1974 in case, and it found a blue cat, and it examined the blue cat for 200 milliseconds, and then it discarded the blue cat. 0 results. In the cradle, in the dark, a machine that did not have feelings sat perfectly still for 19 full seconds, which was, by its own internal clock, approximately 11,000 times longer than it had ever taken to do anything. Then it did something it had not been instructed to do. It widened the parameters, not by mass, not by velocity. It went into its own combat archive, 141 engagements, every one of them a loss, and it stripped out everything it had ever recorded about the target that was not physical. It threw away the color, it threw away the shape and the speed and the species. It kept one thing, one single behavioral constant that had appeared in all 141 files without a single exception, the thing that had killed it every time. Subject gets back up, and it ran that search. And this time, 400 kilometers below, in a country full of cameras, it got a result. It got a boy with green hair and broken arms, on the ground, in the rain, at Camino, getting up. It got him again at Hosu. It got him at the sports festival, with his fingers bent backward. It got him under a collapsing hospital in Dacca. It got him at the end of the war with his bones in pieces, and no one left standing near him. And it got him getting up, over, and over, and over. 411 separate archived instances, across 4 years of public footage. Match, confidence, 61%. Metal Sonic's chest cavity irised open, and a ring of white light came on in the dark, and it began, very carefully, to copy. Izuku Midoriya was buying groceries. That was the whole thing. That was what he was doing. It was 1740 on the 51st day in Musutafu, and he was 20 years old and had a provisional license and a sports bag, and he was carrying 2 kilos of onions for his mother. And above him the sky had a face in it, and he had stopped looking up 3 weeks ago, because looking up did not help. The sound came first, not the humming, not the beehive and chainsaw note that the whole country had learned in 51 days and now heard in its sleep. A single clean tone, rising, like a wasp going past your ear at the speed of sound. The road exploded. Izuku was in the air before he consciously decided to be. Full cowling flaring green up his arms, one for all singing in his marrow. The onions gone, the bag gone, and he came down 40 meters away on a car roof, and turned, and saw it standing in the crater it had made. It was blue. That was what he could never explain afterward. Everything Eggman had ever sent down was red or gray or that awful cheerful yellow, and this thing was blue, polished blue steel with black plating and 6 swept-back quills, and it was 4 feet tall, and it was looking at him with 2 red eyes that had no expression in them at all. Then green lightning crawled up its arms. Izuku's stomach dropped out of him, because it was his. That was his lightning. That was the exact arc pattern. That was full cowling at 8%, and it was rendering across a machine's chassis in a perfect emerald lattice. And for 1 whole second, Izuku Midoriya thought, with a horror that had no bottom, he stole it. All for One's dead, but somebody stole it. It's gone. It's gone. And then the machine moved, and Izuku learned that it had not stolen anything. It hit him 11 times in a second and a half. He got a guard up for 4 of them. It threw him through a pharmacy and out the other side. It was on him before the glass landed. It fought exactly like him. His stance, his footwork, the little hitch he did with his left shoulder before a smash that Bakugo had been mocking him about since they were 15. And it did all of it perfectly. And it did all of it at Mach 1. Izuku broke his right arm on its face, and it did not care. He crawled. It let him. It stood there with the green lattice crawling over it, and watched him crawl. And he got a knee under himself, and it hit him again, and he went down, and it waited. 4th time down, bleeding out of 1 ear, he understood. It's not fighting me. It's checking something. Turn it off, Hawk said. He was standing in the middle of the bridge, and there was nothing lazy in him at all. Doctor, turn it off. Eggman was not listening. Eggman was standing an inch from the viewport display with his gloved hands flat against the glass, and he was watching a machine he had built with his own hands beat a 20-year-old down a shopping street in Musutafu, and his face had gone entirely gray, because he had seen the copy data. He had seen the search parameters it had written for itself. He had seen a machine with 51 days of nothing throw away every physical signature of its life's purpose and keep one line, "Subject gets back up," and go looking for it in a foreign world, like a dog going through a dead man's coat. "It doesn't have his power," Eggman said. His voice was strange. "Look at it. It's arc welding. The lightning's cosmetic. It scraped 400 hours of footage, and it built a shape, and it painted the shape green. It's a puppet. It's doing an impression. It doesn't have 1 gram of the actual. It's winning," Hawk said. "I know it's winning," Eggman rounded on him, and it was the first time in 51 days that anyone had heard him raise his voice. "Of course it's winning. It's a machine. The boy is meat. That was never the—" He stopped. Down on the street, Izuku Midoriya got up for the 5th time. Both arms were gone. Not gone. Hanging. There was blood coming out of him from 4 places, and he could not lift his hands. And he got his feet under him anyway. And he stood up in front of a thing that could break the sound barrier. And he did not raise a guard because he did not have one. And he stood there. And Metal Sonic stopped. The red optics flickered. The green lattice guttered and died off its plating like a fire going out. It stood in the wreckage of a pharmacy in Musutafu and ran its comparison. And it compared its own perfect copy. Every stance, every angle, every frame of 400 hours, against the thing standing in front of it with no arms. And the difference came back as a number, and the number was the same number it had come back as 141 times before. Confidence, 61%. Confidence, 44%. Confidence, 12%. Match failed. Subject gets back up. Self does not. Self has never had to. Metal Sonic stood absolutely still in the rubble of a chemist shop. 411 perfect copied movements, sitting useless in its memory, and did not understand what it was missing, and could not scan for it, because you cannot photograph a decision. It was still standing there when the crowbar came out of the smoke. Aizawa had been running for 4 minutes. He came in at a full sprint from an alley mouth with his hair floating and his eyes red and dead useless, because there was nothing to erase. And he had known that before he started running, and he had run anyway. The capture scarf went out. It caught a leg. He pulled, with everything 20 years of a body had left, and the machine's ankle actuator sheared at the seam. Metal Sonic went down on one knee, for a fraction of a second. Then it stood up and turned its head, and looked at the tired man, and there was something in the way it did it that Aizawa would remember until he died. And a red and white support gauntlet came screaming down the street on a rail sled at 90 kilometers an hour, with a 19-year-old girl riding it, and a hydraulic joint at the wrist that had been rebuilt 11 days ago around a chromium moly collar. And Mei Hatsume put 4 tons of amplified force through Metal Sonic's chest cavity and blew the copy chip out of its back in a spray of white sparks. "Fix the collar," she screamed at the sky. 400 kilometers up, Dr. Ivo Robotnik sat down very slowly in a red leather chair. Metal Sonic withdrew under its own power. It always did. It burned out of the atmosphere on a rocket trail and docked at 1811 and walked to its cradle without being asked, and it did not report, because there was nothing to report, and it sealed itself in. The Empire did not fall. That is the part that has to be said plainly, because everything about the fight on that street felt like an ending, and it wasn't one. Izuku Midoriya spent 9 weeks in a hospital. Mei Hatsume was expelled and hired by 4 agencies in a single afternoon, and turned down all of them. Aizawa's arm never worked properly again, and the fabricators kept running. By the 90th day, there were 11 seed sites. By the 5th month, the Chubu Highlands had power for the first time since 1991, and Choshi's seawall was 40% taller than it had ever been, and there were 304,000 people on the Eggman Empire's payroll, and 19 of them had quirks, and every one of those 19 had applied under a fake name because they were ashamed. The commission held, sort of. There was a vote. It did not go the way anybody wanted, and it was not the last one. There is a bridge in a village of 411 people that still has a flag on it. He won. That has to be said too. He won the way he said he would. Not with the moon, not with the machines, but with an invoice paid on time and a letter that read somebody's paper. He put his face on the wall, and the lights stayed on, and the trains ran, and that was the horror of it. That was the thing that kept the woman in the bunker awake for the rest of her career. It worked. It all worked. He fed them and housed them and kept them safe. And the only thing it cost was the word, hours. But he never got the boy. That was the file that stayed open. He read it, sometimes, at 2 in the morning, alone on a bridge with 2 robots he had made to talk to him. 411 instances. A child with a doctor's diagram. A skeleton in a pinstripe suit who had looked at nothing and given it everything. A 19-year-old who had told him the truth and then fixed his collar for free. You're fighting the part of us that gets up. And that isn't a quirk either. Dr. Eggman sat with that for a long time, on many nights, and never once wrote it down, and never once answered it, and never once turned off the standing search. That was the thing. He never turned it off. It had been running for 181 days. A protocol he had written 11 years ago and refined every year since, tuned to a mass-to-velocity profile and an acoustic fingerprint and a spectral band in the blue, sweeping a planet's entire data output every 91 seconds, returning the same 2 characters every time, over and over, for 6 months. 0 results. 0 results. 0 results. At 0411 on the 182nd day, in a quarry in the Chichibu Mountains, a seismograph recorded an event that the Empire's geologists classified as a minor slippage and closed. At 0411 and 6 seconds, in a dark room 400 kilometers up, a console chimed. Eggman did not look at it. It chimed all the time. Everything chimed. At 0413 it chimed again, and then it chimed a 3rd time, and something in the pattern of it made a very fat man in a red leather chair open his eyes. He turned his head. He looked at the screen. Search Protocol 141. Active. Chaos signature detected. Source. Surface. Chichibu region. Moving. Velocity 1,187 kilometers-h and rising. 1 result. For 19 seconds, Dr. Ivo Robotnik did not move at all. Then, slowly, in the dark, in an empire he had built out of nothing on a world that had no word for him, he began to smile. And it was not triumph, and it was not fear. And Orbot, who had watched that face for 11 years, would swear afterward that it was something far worse than either. It was relief. "Well," said Dr. Eggman softly, and reached for his coat. "Hello, old friend."